So picture this. You're watching a movie that's boring you to tears. The plot's going nowhere, the dialogue is clunky, and the pacing feels off. You're trying to work out if you can walk out of the movie theater without drawing too much attention to yourself. But then suddenly, almost out of nowhere and without any warning, the movie delivers a scene so perfect, so spectacular, that you forget you were just about to give up on the movie a few minutes ago. That's what we're talking about today. The moments that people remember years later, even if they can't remember anything else about the movie. The sequences that get replayed on YouTube millions upon millions of times, while the rest of the film disappears into dust. Now, most lists like this are just going to recycle the same famous scenes everyone's already seen several times. So I wanted to do something different. I hunted and dug deep for the obscure stuff. Terrible movies you've probably never heard of that somehow managed to create one or two absolutely perfect moments. By the end of this video, you're going to walk away with a list of scenes to track down. Moments that deserve to be discovered. Scenes that I hope will allow you to see the same magic I saw, but for the very first time, or at the very least rediscover something you may have forgotten about. Doom, when 4 minutes of first-person shooting justified 113 minutes of nonsense. In 2005, Universal Pictures had a problem. They'd spent $60 million making a movie based on Doom, one of the most influential video games ever created, and the result was a boring, generic sci-fi action movie that had almost nothing to do with the games fans loved. The plot was straightforward. A team of space marines gets sent to a research facility on Mars to investigate a quarantine breach. They discover the scientists have been conducting genetic experiments that turned people into monsters. The Marines have to fight their way through the facility and contain the outbreak before it reaches Earth. So yeah, this is standard, predictable, safe, generic action sci-fi stuff, right? But here's the problem. Doom, the video game, was not even remotely safe. It was fast, visceral, and relentlessly violent. You ran through corridors blasting demons from hell with absurdly powerful weapons while metal music screamed in the background. The game was pure adrenaline, but the movie was slow, talky, and took itself way too seriously. But then, towards the end of the movie, something truly magical happened. Karl Urban's character, known only as Reaper, gets injected with an experimental serum and gains enhanced abilities. He grabs a massive gun and starts hunting monsters through the facility. And suddenly, without warning, the camera shifts to first-person perspective. For the next 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the entire film becomes the video game. The camera moves exactly like a player controlling a video game character. Reaper runs down corridors, kicks open doors, reloads weapons, and blasts monsters in close-quarters combat. And for those 4 minutes, the movie finally delivered what every gamer had always wanted to see on screen. Monsters jump out from around corners, Reaper switches weapons mid-fight, the camera whips around as he checks his surroundings. It's chaotic, violent, and looks exactly like playing Doom. The sequence ends with Reaper finding a chainsaw and using it to brutally kill monsters, a direct homage to the game's most iconic weapon. Then the sequence ends, the camera cuts back to traditional filmmaking, and the movie goes right back to being boring and forgettable. But that 4-minute sequence became legendary. It's been uploaded to YouTube and watched millions of times. It's probably the only thing most people remember about the entire film, and I'm pretty sure those 4 minutes are the only reason anyone still thinks about Doom 2 decades later. Speed Racer, when visual chaos became visual poetry, with one spectacular race sequence. The Wachowskis are most famous for making the Matrix trilogy, which turned them into legends. So when they announced their next project would be a live-action adaptation of Speed Racer, a 1960s Japanese anime about a kid who drives really fast cars, people were willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. But then, the movie came out in May 2008, and audiences realized the Wachowskis were absolutely not invincible legends. Speed Racer looked like someone had liquefied a bag of Skittles and poured it directly onto the screen. Every frame was oversaturated with neon colors. The acting was exaggerated and cartoonish. The plot involved corporate espionage in professional racing, which sounds exciting until you realize you're going to learn about this through never-ending dialogue. The races themselves were computer-generated chaos where cars flipped, spun, and flew through the air while the background melted into abstract lines and shapes. And visually, it was exhausting. Speed Racer cost $120 million to make, and it earned only $93 million worldwide, which meant that Warner Brothers lost tens of millions of dollars when you also account for the marketing budget. So the film was a critical and commercial disaster. But then, without any warning, a moment of magic. The final race happens. This race is a spectacularly beautiful, emotional, and kinetic piece of masterful filmmaking. The Wachowskis unleash every visual trick they've been holding back. The cars move like fighter jets through impossible terrain. The colors become more vivid. The camera follows speed through loops, jumps, and hairpin turns, while flashbacks of pivotal emotional scenes play over the action. The race lasts about 4 to 5 minutes, and it almost makes up for the entire 2-hour runtime. The editing is precise, the emotional beats land, and for the first time in the movie, the visual chaos actually enhances the experience instead of overwhelming it. You feel the speed, the danger, and the stakes. Millions of people who couldn't sit through the full movie still rewatch and celebrate that sequence on YouTube. It is a kinetic, emotional, and visually stunning piece of filmmaking that proved the Wachowskis still had that Matrix magic, even if the rest of the film couldn't maintain that energy. Wanted, 2008. One single real moment in a completely absurd cartoonish movie. In 2008, Universal Pictures released Wanted, a film about a secret society of assassins who can curve bullets and receive orders from a mystical loom. Yes, a loom. The plot was absurd, the action defied all physics, and the entire premise required audiences to accept that Angelina Jolie could bend bullets around corners. The film starred James McAvoy as Wesley Gibson, a miserable office worker with crippling anxiety who discovers he's the son of one of the world's greatest assassins. He gets recruited into the fraternity, learns to curve bullets, and spends the rest of the movie shooting people while performing physics-defying action sequences in slow motion. Wanted was made for $75 million and earned $342.5 million worldwide. So, financially, it was a hit. But critically, it was divisive, and many people found the plot to be exhaustingly dumb and the action sequences too ridiculous to take seriously. I mean, don't get me wrong, the action in this movie is a lot of fun, especially if you're a 14-year-old boy. But it's just so over the top. Anyway, before any of the assassin training, before the curving bullets and exploding rats, multiple rats explode in this movie. One of the opening scenes perfectly captures the soul-crushing misery of corporate office life and gives us the most satisfying I quit moments in history. Let me paint the picture. Wesley Gibson normally sits in his cubicle, pale and sweaty. His life is so meaningless, sitting at that cubicle usually causes him to suffer a panic attack, all while he has to deal with annoying, overbearing coworkers, one of which is having an affair with his girlfriend. But today is different because he's just seen a huge amount of money in his bank account. He realizes he's free, and his whole demeanor changes. Then his supervisor, Janice, comes over and just won't stop berating him while loudly clicking a stapler right next to his face. And then Wesley snaps. What happens next is the most perfect I quit speech ever given, followed by him picking up his keyboard and smashing it directly into the face of the guy having an affair with his girlfriend. This action sends teeth and letters of the keyboard flying in slow motion, individual keys spelling out the word that Wesley screams as he quits his job in the most violent, cathartic way possible. The scene lasts maybe 3 minutes, but was able to capture something that connected with millions of people because that clip alone has been watched over 23 million times on YouTube. That scene is the only moment in the entire film that feels real. The anger, the frustration, The fantasy of telling your terrible boss exactly what you think before walking out forever. And honestly, that scene was almost worth sitting through 2 hours of physics-defying action and cartoonishly bad plot lines. Hardcore Henry, when a Russian director made the most nauseating and visually exhausting movie that managed to deliver a few incredibly spectacular moments. Hardcore Henry was an experiment. The entire film was shot from first-person perspective, like a video game, following a cyborg named Henry through 90 minutes of non-stop violence. It was directed by Ilya Naishuller, a Russian music video director making his feature debut, and it looked like someone had given a GoPro to a parkour athlete with a gun. The film was released in April 2016 to mixed reviews. Some critics praised the innovative camera work and relentless action. Others found it exhausting, visually incoherent, and impossible to follow. The plot was thin, the dialogue was minimal, and the first-person gimmick wore out its welcome quickly for audiences who couldn't handle 90 minutes of shaky cam violence. Hardcore Henry made $16 million worldwide on a $2 million budget, so financially it was successful. But it was divisive enough that most people either loved it or hated it with no middle ground. Then came 3 sequences that justified the entire experiment. The first is the building shootout scene set to Queen's "Don't Stop Me Now." Henry fights through a bunch of men while the song plays. The editing syncs perfectly with the music, bodies fall in rhythm with the beat, and the sequence becomes a perfectly choreographed ballet of violence that makes the first-person perspective actually enhance the experience instead of just making audiences nauseous. The second scene involves a flamethrower and one of the most absurd lines in action movie history. Henry encounters a villain wearing a bright jacket, and his ally Jimmy, played by Charlton Copley, shouts out a sarcastic remark, and without missing a single beat, the man responds by firing a flamethrower in their direction. The moment lasts for about 14 seconds, and it is so unexpected, instant, and over the top, yet it delivered pure comedic catharsis, and it was hilariously stupid and so satisfying at the same time. The third scene comes during an empty building shootout. Henry fights his way through waves of armed mercenaries, with Jimmy acting as a character, talking him through what at times feels like a video game tutorial. Jimmy is also constantly respawning into new characters, all while reciting his NPC lines and helpfully providing support and game tip screen information in what has to be one of the most realistic game-playing sequences ever put in a movie. The first-person perspective, which felt gimmicky and exhausting through most of the film, suddenly becomes the perfect way to experience this moment. Millions of people who found the full film too exhausting to sit through have returned to these scenes over and over again on YouTube. Hardcore Henry proved that first-person action could work in feature films, even if 96 minutes might have been too much for many. But these scenes are genuinely spectacular and prove that sometimes all a movie needs is a few perfect moments to justify its existence. The Grey 2012, The Power of Choosing to Fight, even when you know you'll lose. Fair warning, major spoilers ahead. The Grey was marketed as Liam Neeson fighting wolves. The trailer showed him taping bottles to his hands and preparing for combat in the Alaskan wilderness. Audiences showed up in January 2012 expecting Taken, but this time with wolves. You know, Liam Neeson using his particular set of skills to punch animals in the face? What they got instead was a slow, meditative survival thriller about men confronting their mortality in the frozen wilderness. The film followed oil rig workers whose plane crashes in Alaska, leaving them stranded and hunted by a pack of territorial wolves. One by one, the survivors get taken out. Not in exciting action sequences, but in brutal, random ways that feel unfair and meaningless. Neeson played John Otway, a wolf hunter working for the oil company who becomes the de facto leader of the survivors. The film was bleak, philosophical, and spent long stretches focused on men having existential conversations about faith and death while freezing to death. I mean, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't what audiences expected or what the trailer had sold. The Grey made $81.2 million domestically on a $25 million budget. And reviews were mixed, mostly because audiences felt misled. This wasn't an action movie. It was a meditation on mortality disguised as a survival thriller. But then came the ending that changed everything. Otway is the last survivor and stumbles directly into the wolves' den. He's surrounded by the pack and realizes there's no escape. The alpha wolf approaches, and Otway knows this is where he dies. He opens his wallet and looks at a photo of his wife, the woman whose recent death he has been mourning throughout the entire film. He'd also been suicidal since the beginning of the movie, and now he has the perfect excuse to just give up and let death take him. The most poignant moments of his life with his wife and moments from his childhood flashes before his eyes. While he tapes many liquor bottles to one hand as makeshift claws, he tapes a knife to the other. He looks at the alpha wolf and recites the poem, once more into the fray, into the last good fight I'll ever know. Live and die on this day. Live and die on this day. The screen cuts to black, and the film ends without showing the fight. There's no resolution, no victory. Just a man choosing to fight even though he knows he's going to lose. Because fighting is better than giving up. Audiences who stuck around through the credits got one final shot. A post-credit scene showing a bloodied Otway lying on the ground on top of the alpha wolf. Both are breathing heavily. The outcome is ambiguous, but it doesn't matter. The point was the choice to fight. That ending recontextualized the entire film. The Gray wasn't about wolves or survival. It was about a suicidal man rediscovering the will to live, even if living means dying on your feet instead of your knees. The final stand became one of the most iconic scenes with over 2 million views on YouTube, and the main reason people still think about The Gray over a decade later.